Alright, so with the imminent release of Future Tones in a few days, I figured some might like to know how this differs from the other console-based Project Diva games that they have been playing. In short, it is very different. I would like to go over the game mechanics, as I feel that people will be looking at videos and screenshots and assuming the game is played just like the console games. Not really, no. Alright, to do this I'd like to introduce you the arcade cabinet and how it looks like it has transitioned to the PS4. Here we have the current arcade cabinet. This is the control layout, and this is what is being adopted to the PS4 version. Note that there is no D-pad equivalent, just the face buttons and a touch panel. More importantly, they are laid out in a straight line instead of the up, down, left, right like before. There are 4 types of notes in the arcade game. Bear in mind that I'm making these naming conventions up here. You've got regular notes, hold, multi, or swipe. The regular notes are what you expect. Tap the corresponding button. Just like the previous console games, the PS4 adaptation of Future Tones has adopted the ability to alternate between the right and left hand sides of the controller. Hold notes. These are not represented with a long line. They do not require you to hold and let go at the correct time or lose your combo. Instead, they are optional, and are either held as long as you can or until you receive maximum point bonus out of them. The big difference here is that you can and almost always will be playing other notes while holding one of these. This means that in the PS4 you'll be holding one button, potentially attempting to play the other notes on the other side of the controller, potentially and commonly ending up holding diagonal directions to cover 2 buttons, and eventually 2 opposite diagonal directions on either side of the controller. What makes this mechanic more interesting is that, say for example you have a hold circle, followed by a regular circle, then a hold triangle. If you want to go for a perfect, you would have to drop the hold circle and hit the second circle. But you could instead opt to continue holding that circle, hit an incorrect note on the second circle to prevent massive loss of life, then add the hold triangle, giving you a 2-button hold bonus instead. I wonder which one will give you a higher score. And yes, I have seen people do this in the arcades. Given that you can alternate in the PS4 version, I'm not yet sure if the console versions will make it possible to hold circle while playing other circles. From gameplay footage I've seen so far, it appears that they've always dropped, so they may have put a mechanic in place to make sure that this is still a decision you have to make. Multi-notes. These are where you press 2, 3, or even all 4 buttons at once. In the arcades, these are typically situated on screen in line with the buttons on the arcade cabinet itself, so they are easy to understand. On harder songs, especially in Extreme, this representation changes to a vertical orientation as they can throw a lot of double or triple notes at you, but they usually still contain the same gap visually. And yes, multi-notes can be hold notes too. This is why on the PS4 version you will have the option to visually represent certain buttons as arrows instead of face buttons. Now this is important to note. Many may think that they may see an arrow note, such as up, and think that they need to press up and triangle at the same time. In Future Tones, this is absolutely not the case. An up arrow is just a triangle. You can use up or triangle. It is optional to represent 2 buttons as arrows to make it easier for the PS4 controller user to have their brains quickly process which 2 buttons are best to hold in order to cater for the potential of having to hold one half of the controller diagonally to cover the triple or quad notes. You can also enable a setting, which may be turned on by default, that brings up the face buttons on screen, highlighting which 2, 3 or 4 buttons you'll need to press. And from gameplay footage and screenshots I've seen so far, I believe that by default, they have set it so that triangle and square are represented as up and left. But we won't know this for sure until the game is released. Note that in Future Tones you actually have complete control over how you set up your controller. You can even assign buttons to be 2, 3, or even all 4 buttons at once. And then there are swipe notes. These are represented by arrows pointing left or right, which sometimes can be followed by a line. Now, important history to note, the touch panel was introduced in the Future Tones release of the arcade cabinet back in November 2013. The previous cabinets did not have a touch panel, as such many songs do not use this. This is why you'll see that some songs have an indication that swipe notes exist, and is also why an extra extreme difficulty exists, as this typically is a new note chart that includes the touch panel. It does not actually necessarily mean that the song is harder in difficulty. More and more songs are getting extra extreme difficulty added over time, so I suspect that this will come as additional DLC or maybe even as free patches in the PS4 version as well. Alright, so how do they work? In the arcade, these are played by swiping the touch panel in the corresponding direction. The longer the line, the further across the touch panel you need to swipe. This can be done as quickly as you want, and you can even reset your hand position and swipe again if you find out that you haven't covered enough area to achieve a max slide. You can even have two of these appear at the same time. They can go in different directions or even the same direction. No dotted lines after those arrows? The flick can be as quick as a button tap. And yes, swipe notes can appear while you're holding all 4 face buttons down. The PS4 version has been modified to use either the analog sticks or the LR buttons. It appears that you need to hold them instead of traverse further across the touch panel, and it also appears that if you use the analog sticks, it depends on which direction you tilt them. Else, I guess that you could cover the double left to right swipe notes by the fact that there are 2 L1, L2 and R1, R2 buttons. So that's it for the mechanics. I'll do another video shortly about the Future Tones game menu. See you soon. As this is typically a new note chart that includes